Yes, yes, they will. Yes. Okay. Well, a very good morning to you all, and a very warm welcome, literally warm welcome, to everybody here at 44 Belgrave Square, and to everybody who's joining remotely. My name is Belinda Beefting, and I'm the Research Director at the IPA, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the launch of TouchPoints 2023. I think I just worked out it's the 16th launch of TouchPoints, so pretty amazing. We have a stellar lineup of speakers this morning, but first I need to let you know that the event is being recorded and a link will be shared after the event, so you'll be able to get all of the presentations and you'll be able to watch a recording should you so desire. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end once everybody's spoken. So if you've got any questions, can you save them until the end and we'll take them then. If you're joining virtually, please feel free to send your questions in. We'd love some contributions from you. So down to business. Josh Krzyzewski, our IPA President and CEO UK and EMEA for Group M, is going to start the session reflecting a little on our recent Signals in the Noise event, which highlighted how we live in an era of data abundance and what the pitfalls are. He talks about the need for due diligence around our data use and, of course, talks about the importance of using TouchPoints data to better understand the motivations and lives of consumers. Josh will be joining us from Cannes. He will be joined by Kelly Beaver, MBE, who is CEO of Ipsos. She's our keynote speaker this morning, and she'll be taking us through a State of the Nation look at some of the key findings from across Ipsos's extensive research on political, economic and social life in 2023. Then we'll welcome Vicky Fox, who's the Chief Planning Officer for OMD UK. She'll be showing us how OMD use TouchPoints to drive success for their clients. Vicky's followed by Ruth Bates, who's Head of Data Arts from Saatchi & Saatchi, and Ruth is going to talk us through how Saatchi have used TouchPoints respondent level data to create a playbook of micro moments for their key clients. And then finally we have Dan Flynn from the IPA, who will give us an overview of the latest findings from TouchPoints and what to expect from the new data. Then we'll have the Q&A session, so as I said, keep all your questions for the end. We'll aim to finish by about 11:30, so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Josh.
Hi everyone, I'm Josh Krzyzewski and I'm the CEO of EMEA and UK at Group M and the President of the IPA. Firstly, I apologise for not being with you in person. I'll be honest, I'm actually in Cannes today, but of course I would much rather be with you all as the team launch the new version of the TouchPoints data for 2023. Welcome all. One of the things I've always loved about the IPA has been its ability to bring industry knowledge and expertise together to develop a better, future-facing industry. Whilst many of us today come from agencies, I'm really pleased to welcome so many of you from media owners, clients, journalists, and across the whole spectrum of our industry. I know that you're all crowded into room 1 there at Belgrave Square, but I'm also very pleased to see that metropolitan centricity isn't a constraint when it comes to engaging with the IPA now. Many people today are tuning in to the online event, and for those who are watching this on catch-up, you're in for a real treat. So where do I begin? Well, there's no doubt we're living through an era of incredible data abundance, whether that's data from the tech platforms, mixed media modelling, proprietary data, social listening, AI solutions, the list goes on. The number of data sets that we have access to has risen exponentially, whilst the amount of time we have to analyse each of them has gone in the opposite direction. There are just so many more sources that we have access to as an agency compared to when I started out that it's quite bewildering, even for me, let alone people beginning their careers in the industry. So it's more important than ever that we do our due diligence to understand the fundamentals. Who created the data source and why? What was it designed to do? Is it representative of the whole population? Can I trust it? Data sets just aren't as comparable as they used to be, and that leads to an increased level of noise around the data. So planners need to make more choices, and I'm not sure all those choices necessarily always help. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that one of the biggest risks we face is forgetting that it's a real person at the heart of every decision. That puts the onus on us to see through that noise and understand those people, who they are, what they're doing, how they're thinking, what motivates them, what challenges they face, the role media plays in shaping their day, and how they spend their hard-earned earnings. Ultimately, why the brand you represent would appeal to them. TouchPoints is a product of the industry coming together with the IPA to develop the only tool I've ever seen which not only enables you to understand people in a rigorous and representative way, but through the channel planner to actually plan and buy against the segments you create. At Group M, we run our plans through the TouchPoints channel planner, not least to ensure that diverse groups are included and overall frequency is taken into account. I'm sure the wonderful Vicky Fox will outline how TouchPoints is used at OMD, but certainly within the Group M agencies, it continues to be fundamental to the successes of so many of our clients, whether it's understanding the motivations and patterns of shopper behaviour for Tesco's audiences, or deep diving into the many ways in which Google products shape our lives. It's fantastic that we have TouchPoints to really understand the people at the heart of every decision. And I would encourage everyone here to use this latest version of TouchPoints to delve that little bit deeper. So thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy what's to come. Starting with Kelly Beaver, MBE, who's the Chief Executive of Ipsos, for our keynote address.
Hello, and thank you very much, Josh. So obviously, I did forgo Cannes to be with you today. I also forgone the first part of Ascot, which you will note if you see my hat in my bag for later. So, as you said, I'm Kelly, and I lead Ipsos in the UK, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the decade that we are in and the mood of the nation as it stands today. So at Ipsos, we're referring to the 2020s as the restless decade. It is a decade where we have seen a lot of really historic events. Once in a 100-year pandemic. We have also seen the first war in Europe since the 1940s and the highest level of inflation since the 1980s. It has been quite a start to the 2020s. And of course, how people also live their lives have been changing. We have seen demographic shifts, race to net zero, and changes and shifts in our capabilities around technology and artificial intelligence. So instead of having me, I thought maybe you could have ChatGPT, so I asked it what it would say about the mood of the nation. And mostly it got it right. It said a lot about how depressed everybody is, a little bit how it's slightly better from last year. But it made one really serious omission. It didn't use any of Ipsos's data. Absolutely horrific. And actually, the quality, really rigorous data that it didn't include in its synopsis means that I don't trust it wholly and completely just yet. But with that, what I thought I would do is to show you one of our core data points. This is something that comes from our global study. And what you can see here actually is that 7 in 10 people are really feeling the impact of the poly crises. Lots of crises impacting at the same time. The impact of those is greater than the sum of the parts. 7 in 10 say there are so many critical problems in the world today that I am struggling to decide what to focus on. And it is real. People are not imagining that we are feeling the squeeze from all of these different tensions in this restless decade. You can see the global context has been shifting. Economic crises, political instability, the rise of new powers, also climate disasters and social unrest. these things are fundamentally shaping not just the global, but also what we are feeling locally. And in what is becoming a much more competitive context, the UK and our people, they need to transform, they need to evolve. Do they feel like transforming and evolving? Well, no, they're feeling really poor. They're feeling quite down, and the public mood from a lot of our data does play quite a sombre tune. The indications so far are that inflation in the UK will be stickier than it is in any other country around the world. Interest rates are set to rise, and the British people are definitely feeling the squeeze. This is a study that we've conducted across 29 countries globally, and Brits, we top the list. We don't want to top this list. This list is about a question around whether people expect that their disposable income is going to drop in the next 12 months. We also top the list for the proportion of people who believe that we're already in a recession. That's not a great place to be. We're up at the top with some of the LATAM countries. It's not a great spot. But we're not just seeing the public concerned about the economy and about their own personal economic circumstances. We're also seeing a well-being recession, a happiness recession. And this is some data that I'm showing you now from the Office of National Statistics. They ask quite regularly about people's sentiment about whether they feel that their life satisfaction is better or worse, that things in life are worthwhile, whether they felt happy yesterday, and whether they felt anxious yesterday. And what you can see in this data, if I step out of the way slightly for those who are trying to see the data, is that actually we went into quite a slump throughout the course of the pandemic. And like many of our data sets, in 2021, as the vaccine set in, we saw a slight boost and a slight recovery, but it is now very much either stagnant or on a downward trajectory for the top life satisfaction, things in life are worthwhile, happy yesterday, and the opposite on anxious yesterday, which is of course the wrong direction you want to see that one going into. And it feeds through to how people feel about our politics today and their overall dissatisfaction with the government. So Labour are leading substantively still in the voting intention polls. And there is a lot around the context and the mood of the nation that impacts how people feel about the governing party. Of course, there was also the brief Truss interlude and then the recovery and hangover from Boris Johnson's parties, which impacted on the voting intention as well. However, we are seeing when we ask the question to people about what they're happy about, only 1 in 5 are happy about the state of Britain and a similar number about the state of the world. But everything I have shown you so far is just a flicker, it's just an indicator, it's a moment in time. At Ipsos, we talk again about attitudes, opinions, and then values. And human values, our value system, it changes much slower, and we've seen a lot of stickiness. We've got one of the longest running studies tracking values in the world and in the UK. And actually, we are starting to see values move. This is one of the value sentiments that we've been tracking over certainly 20 years and longer in some other studies that we do. The statement is, I wish I could slow down the pace of my life. And for the majority of 20 years from 1999, 20 years on from that, it has been in around half of the British populace who would say that. In the last 2 years, it's moved 10 percentage points. And for those of you who are into data, that is quite a shift in that period for something that has been stagnant and has been slow. So this sense of overload, it is real and it is starting to move public concerns. So the public, they're feeling poorer, they're feeling quite dissatisfied, they are feeling overwhelmed. I said I would give you a bit of a silver lining, or I hope I did, because these presentations from me at this particular moment in time are always quite depressing. So the silver lining is it's slightly better than it was a year ago, but I don't think that's going to move the dial. So wait till later and we'll try to come back to that. But it is worth trying to understand how brands navigate this context where you have this type of public mood, but also this deep concern about their economic circumstances. And it is, as you've seen, a restless period of time for the public. At Ipsos, we have been working on a large research programme over the last 6 to 12 months, looking at what really drives brand choice, and in particular in a period of restlessness, concern about the economy, being close to consumers and understanding how they are making their choices and their decisions really, really matters. And for us, it boils down to these 3 factors: expectations, context, and empathy. So on expectations, first of all, this is what people feel and think about a brand. And we know from neuroscience that the brain is it thinks it's a really good predictive machine. And so it makes a lot of assumptions that feed into the choices you make off the bat every single day, what kind of train you board, what you pick up from where you get your coffee. It just goes into autopilot. And when the expectations from your assumptions and they deliver, it's very relaxing, it's very comforting for you. When it doesn't, actually it takes a lot more energy. My favourite brand that manages this really well is Michael O'Leary's Ryanair brand. Now, you talk to Michael and he'll tell you, I'm really thinking about putting a standing area at the back of the plane, because if we have a standing area, we can do cheaper tickets, it'll give people more space. And actually, I think we should be charging for the use of our toilets. This is a low-cost budget airline. That isn't you're listening to that, you're thinking it's a bit extreme, but it is a low-cost budget airline. So what happens when you get on the plane? You get on the plane, there's no standing area, you've got a seat. Wow, I've got a seat. And then you go to use the bathroom and you didn't have to pay anything. You come off that flight and you think that was a budget airline, but my God, didn't they really deliver the frills? So expectations, I don't think all brands want to quite go down that route. However, it does work, and he did set the tone. And your expectations and your assumptions was more than met. It was over-delivered upon. And for brands, in the context that we're in, thinking about how consumers perceive your brand, but also how you can use social and sensory cues to help them to shape what they expect and what they want from it. Context. So at Ipsos, context is king. We do a lot of research to give us the broader context on humans and life and society, not just here in the UK, but globally as well. And obviously the macro context that we are in will shape decisions that people are making. We've touched on some of those points, from inflation to climate change, etc. But also the micro context, so the occasions and the locations in which people are actually making those choices. And then empathy. In times of uncertainty, in restless periods like that we are in today, empathy from a public choice perspective, from the data we've looked at, it dials up. And just think back to 2008 when we were in the point of a recession here in the UK. Government pulled out all the stops, say what you will. They pulled out all the stops, they stopped the banks from going under, they made sure that there was money coming out of the cash machines, etc. Who did the public think did the best job? Supermarkets, because they were helping people make tiny little savings, they dialed into the public need and the public attitude and the mood. Every little helps. Those kind of slogans in that moment, and tapping into demonstrating that you understood what mattered to the British public. The supermarkets came out top in terms of who the public thought did the most for them during that particular point in time. And we are in a similar moment now in some ways, in that the public are deeply concerned, economic circumstance, economy for the country. So, to recap on some of the reflections, 2022 was a bad year for the British public. 2023 is pretty similar, slight movement, but not particularly much. And we have seen a rise in sentiment in our studies where people are harking back to nostalgia. They want to look more to the local, the familiar. And actually there's a role for brands in that, not just to tap into the values which are feeding a quite negative and retreating public mood, but also to be the voice of creating optimism for the future and helping to create those glimmers of hope. Secondly, the combination of pressures, we spoke briefly about the poly crisis itself, it has been a catalyst to shift public and consumer behaviours more than we have seen on those really fundamental value sets as well for some time. And in those moments, being really close to consumers and what's happening, what they're thinking, how those expectations, how the context, how empathy is playing, that is really critical. And then lastly, the recipe for brand success, those expectations, context, empathy, and centering on understanding people. To do that, you really need best in quality data and to insightfully interpret that data. What better place to start than the IPA TouchPoints study? Now, a final note, because I promised optimism and I promised something positive. So I showed you earlier the slide that said that 1 in 5 say that they are happy about the state of Britain and happy about the state in the world. But let's expand that a little bit and let's look at the whole question set. Actually, when you expand it, 3/4 are happy with their relationships and their families. 7 in 10 happy with their home, and 2/3 with their friendships. We also have nearly 6 in 10 who are happy with their romantic relationships. So I'll make your own judgment on whether or not those in multiple relationships are happier than the average. So, the moral of the story, there is optimism. You just need to look where to find it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Where's the clicker? There we go. I am delighted to see you all here today. I'm particularly delighted because it's Cannes. I've forgotten it was Ascot, and it's Glastonbury. So, quite honestly, if there's anyone in media in London this week, I'm literally amazed. So, thank you for coming. I'm going to talk to you about. There we go. We have sound. I'm going to talk to you about how we've been making the most of the IPA data at OMD, and I have stolen some fonts from the Heineken. Quite honestly, iconic tagline, refreshes the parts of the plan other research panels can't reach. And then I sort of jovially thought, that's quite a nice line. But it's actually, there's two very important reasons why I chose it. Firstly, it's celebrating its 50th birthday, which I find staggering. And we should, that's talk about an enduring tagline. And we're in the home of advertising. There was absolutely no escape from me bringing that to the presentation. But the second reason why is that a few weeks ago I stumbled upon in Campaign, there's an article about how that tagline actually came about. And it's a fantastic article, and I will try to summarise it in a second. But it's really fascinating to go behind the curtain on some of that stuff to find out how things happen. And that's, I guess, why I'm here today, sort of take you behind the curtain on some of the work that we've been doing. But first, that tagline, right, I mustn't get this wrong because there's some key people here. So Terry Lovelock was a copywriter from CDP, and we're talking 1973, Mad Men UK style. Apparently he received the shortest of short briefs. It was in one word. The brief was a refreshment. He was stumped, and essentially the brief had been knocking around his office for 3 months without inspiration. Can you imagine any of us getting away with doing no work for 3 months? Anyway, like I said, Mad Men. The story is fantastic, and it's in Campaign, you should read it, but basically what followed was a trip to Morocco, ultimatums shouted over the radio in the minicab on the way to the airport, pre-mobile phone days, a 3 a.m. mid-sleep revelation, end lines written on airplane sick bags. Who remembers airplane sick bags? Definitely not then, none of those in Ryanair. And essentially, all culminating in one of the most enduring taglines that ever existed in advertising history. Now, I don't have Heineken as brand at OMD. We don't have any beer brands at OMD, so I feel like I've got no skin in this game. I just really enjoy it and think it's fantastic. So, on with the meat of the presentation, we're going to take a peek behind the curtain of 3 of our brands and how we've used the TouchPoints data to help us understand the digitisation of broadcast channels for Lidl. Mid-funnel, context is everything, and we heard about context is king a minute ago. And connecting our understanding of walled gardens, in particular the social platforms, in a second. So firstly, the digitisation of broadcast channels. And I think TouchPoints has helped us along this journey for lots of different channels. It started with TV to BVOD, and we've used it exclusively and extensively with when we think about audio channels. But I'm going to touch on news brands. Look at those builds. Look, so it's like a mirror. And these are exactly the same sort of data sets and points. The reach declining over time for the print brands have then it's almost mirrored the reach improvement that you get in the online news brands, which is brilliant. Now, there is a difference in dwell time, which we will come back to. And it's not perfectly aligned, but you can see that people are definitely migrating and sort of changing their behaviours. And what we found in particular, and this is getting that incrementality is important so you can understand where to spend. And especially with the Mail and the Guardian, absolutely the heart of their readership is online, which is incredible. You have to and it's only with this kind of data that we can get under the skin of how those brands are how we need to interact with those on our brand. So we went in thinking we've got some key pieces of information, and that's really important. But I sort of the cautionary note is when we look at data, we need to look at data, all different types of data, and put it together as a big jigsaw puzzle. And what TouchPoints data helps us bring is this part of the puzzle into our planning process. So with the TouchPoints data, we were able to do some analysis that looked at what would happen if we spent all of our money in print, all the way through to all of our money news brands online, and we could do the reach, all of the intervals to sort of see where we would optimise. And here we go, 75% would be online if you were looking at optimising to reach. But we needed to put another piece of the jigsaw puzzle. It's how the brand performed in those channels in terms of revenue driving. So we were, and I've taken all of the numbers off, so no one can see any of my client data numbers, but you can see the shape of the curve. They look quite different. So the print curve, revenue curve is very strong. The digital news brands curve is less strong. It's less, firstly, I think it's less established, but secondly, I think what really interesting in the news brands kind of digitization story, it's a really different experience from reading a newspaper and seeing a half page or full page colour, and that experience of an advertising message versus going online, consuming news, and it's not the same environment, and it is different, and I think that's why we're seeing that. Whereas if you sort of go back to the television journey, when we moved to sort of BVOD, it's exactly the same environment. You've got exactly the same remote control, you're sitting on the same sofa, you're watching the same telly. That experience, the ad experience versus the content experience, is almost the same. So I think that's why and I think that will get better over time, because obviously there's, we will have to outweigh that with the targeted opportunities, and all of that comes in. But so what happens is when we put all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together, our spend pattern changes, but only with TouchPoints data building into that story can we get to make the best decisions for our clients. So secondly, I want to talk about mid-funnel, and I'm happy to debate whether funnels are still a thing, because I'll die in a ditch on that, because yes, they're complicated, and yes, you may go backwards and forwards, and they're more complex than ever, and there's lots of data signals, but essentially people do travel towards buying a product. Now, if it's Mercedes, that may take many years. If it's McDonald's, it may take minutes. But ultimately, you are on a journey to buying a product. And I think we've sort of explored, some people call it the messy middle. The mid-funnel activity is really interesting at the moment because of data signals and because of that context opportunity. And sort of bringing that to life for you with our client Compare the Market. So they have two types of campaigns. They have one very much at the top of the funnel and one that operates in the mid-funnel. So, when we introduced the new character, who knew that Russian billionaires weren't going to be that popular last year? Anyway, we introduced our new Wombat character, and mass reach, big advertising, broadcast channels, brilliant, reached everyone, did a fantastic job, that's at the top of the funnel. But the other thing about when you buy from Compare the Market as an aggregator is that you get your rewards. They introduced Meerkat Movies, Meerkat Meals, and then latterly the coffee. Because what they wanted you to kind of buy into was the utility of the brand over time, that you would get the benefit of using, not just choosing your insurance once, but you'd get the benefit of using them all year round because you would get these rewards. But you'd forget that because it would be like another year until you would do that. So we had to also operate in the mid-funnel. In the moments where you think about any of those things, we wanted to make sure you were also thinking about your Meerkat rewards and sort of aligning those things so you felt that benefit all year round. So we did lots of work, and only in using TouchPoints data we can not just look at audiences, but we can pull apart things like coffee lovers, and we can look at time of day, day of week. We can overlay that with our redemption data, and we're able to build out this beautiful kind of it's not, I love a time diary, but this is essentially sort of a roadmap of the day of, we were able to bring this to life for the clients about where the touch points were, when they're getting up, when they're going to work, when they're commuting, what they do in the evening, about how and when and what data and how we're going to bring that to life. for the campaign for our coffee lovers. So it was only because we had that data we were able to build that really nuanced, mid-funnel, sort of data signal enhanced, contextual campaign. And finally, connecting our understanding across the walled garden. So there is nowhere better for a ton of data than in each individual walled garden social platforms. When you go in, you have so much data, and it's absolutely brilliant, and it's like gives you loads of information. But what you can't do is connect across them very easily, and that's why we rely on a data set like TouchPoints to bring that to life for us. I'm going to talk about McDonald's here because the way they use social is, social for them is absolutely crucial. But McDonald's is a huge advertiser. It has campaigns from, regular food events to Monopoly to brand campaigns like Raise Your Arches to sustainability messages like Change a Little, Change a Lot. And the matrix is, insane, and it's quite, operationally very clear that everything has to have its place. There are moments when food comes in and goes out again. So we cannot have cannibalization on the plan. So every investment decision we make has to be really clear and purposeful. And what we were seeing is that, you can start to cannibalize your messages and your audience, depending how many messages you put in market, in terms of ROI in a quarter. So we did some analysis on that. So, and also because the teams, the way that we structure as agencies, people buying all of this stuff in different teams, we wanted to take this sort of more holistic view and take a helicopter view of how all of the social platforms, for example, all connect together. So we used the data set to pull apart here by age and by class, all of the social platforms. And you'll see there's almost no difference. Everything is pretty mass market, so it just sits in the middle. Apart from LinkedIn, I had to pull up WhatsApp because it was sort of hiding behind Instagram. But anyway, essentially LinkedIn is about the only one that looks a bit different. All of the others are just broad. But what does change is the age. And whilst we can go into each of the channels, and I said, make these really nuanced line-by-line campaign decisions, what was really important is we were able to prioritise and make some holistic kind of prioritisation moments with knowing this data and sort of pulling apart how we were going to frame the campaigns. Because whilst we have lots of data in all of the platforms, you can also go broad. And it was to help us make, from these big, investment decisions across the channels, just sort of, there's lots and lots of launch tactics that all of the channels use, and just sort of showing a few here. By putting them together in a matrix against what we knew about the audiences, we were able suddenly to create a really clear prioritization for McDonald's so that we didn't seem to appear everywhere on every channel in the same way for every single campaign. So we were able to sort of pull different levers, and that was really important. And it enabled us to sort of do things like this, where we're bringing different parts of the plan together for different audiences, where we're prioritising 1634s or housewife kids, house people, kids, must remember that. And essentially kind of set us up for success for our sort of, this was sort of going into social planning for 2023, absolutely set McDonald's up for success with some really clear principles for how we behave in social channels that they wouldn't have been possible without. Right, finally, yes, I found the ad. I found the Heineken ad, and I mean, some of you are going to think, what is this? This is nuts. Everybody else, there's a few of us who might, just enjoy a little trip down memory lane. I hope this works. And this was about from 1973.
In this simple experiment, we examine the effect of beer on the feet. Now, these feet have been walking all day and are very tired. We see that there is no movement in them, which is due to lack of refreshment. So we administer the cold Heineken. Wait a few seconds, and we observe that the Heineken is already refreshing the feet, causing lively movements of the toes and activating the arches. Heineken is the only beer able to do this, because it refreshes the parts other beers cannot reach.
I'm not sure that would work as well today, but it was absolutely genius. Thank you very much for your time.
everyone. I'm Ruth Bates. I'm from Saatchi & Saatchi, so I'm the creative agency, or a creative agency in a room. And I'm very aware that I'm speaking to a lot of people that are going to be media planners, and I'm not from the same background, so, there we go. But Saatchi & Saatchi have been privileged enough to have the respondent level data from IPA TouchPoints. And for us, it's been absolutely phenomenal what we've been able to achieve with it. So starting off with why my title is Data Arts, because I always get asked. Saatchi & Saatchi has a really bold ambition to be the most influential creative company in the UK, which when you work there is a bit of a burden. And so what I said was we need to have data in that process at every single point, otherwise we're not going to achieve that ambition. But data means so many things to so many people, and it's got a role everywhere in the process of communications at the moment. But for us, I wanted to be really clear on what it meant, and that's to have data to drive insights, inspiration, performance, and increasingly with generative AI and things like that, enabling us to actually move to a form of expression. And so in order to do that, we felt like it as much of a craft as it would be to be a design director. Being able to really use data as a craft, and therefore we called it data arts rather than data science. But it really does underpin what we do with data. We try to have it at every single step. So the data arts team gives our strategic colleagues a suite of tools for how they can do everything from market sizing through to performance optimization and through to, in the middle, inspiring, hopefully, from time to time, some good thinking. And Moments That Matter is a tool that we've had for probably 5 years now in some form or other, which helps them to, rather than just looking at personas or segments, really think about the ways in which they show up, the places they show up for the brands. So it's a very simple model of a concept, having the media moment, ideally, though sometimes I have to stress that to my creative colleagues. The consumption moment, so the place where the brand can either be purchased or used. And the cultural moment, so it needs to be sizable enough, it needs to be recognisable enough that it's not just something niche for somebody. When we're talking big brand creative, we need to make sure that it's something that really resonates with enough people. So it's a fairly simple model, and we use TouchPoints, and we started using it a few years ago. But our old way of doing it was to find our audience, identify who they were, and look at their profiles across the course of day, do time mapping. And we used to end up with things like this. So you ended up with looking at a whole series of data and saying, for this audience, they seem to be doing this at that time, and they seem to be finishing up after a long day of work. They seem to be going to the pub, they seem to be drinking, they seem to be socialising. And we looked through the data and we thought, this audience seemed to perhaps be doing these things at the same time. And the way that we'd get to these moments would be having a group of strategists get together, put their heads together, come up with all the different moments they could think of. And then what we did as a data team was to go and improve them. We'd just go and size it. We'd go and look at how many people were doing these things and make sure that there were a sizable enough moment to really go after and talk about. So this is an example output from a few years ago. But at the back of my head, as a data person, I was sat there being like, but the person that's drinking, do we know that that person was actually in the pub drinking, or did they go home and drink? And the person that was using social media during the course of the day, was that actually the person that was stressed? So the ability to say that it was the same person doing that same thing at the same time kind of got to me. So when Dan said, would you like to have some respondent level data, I was like, wonderful, data science, like respondent level data. So what we did was get more data, and what this enabled us to do is to end up having a lot more moments. The kind of way that we've used the data has changed. Rather than starting in a room with a bunch of strategists saying, what are those moments you can think of, let's run a workshop on this, and then going away and sizing them, we've started with the data and absolutely no assumptions whatsoever in order to find the moments. And that's been a big shift, not just in terms of the output that we get, but actually culturally within the agency. It's enabled us to actually come to strategists with really interesting things. And it doesn't start with them, it starts with the data. And that's enabled us to kind of start to make a cultural shift in terms of the amount that that our agency is really embracing data. So yeah, data used to inform strategy. That's what we're doing now, rather than data using just to prove it. We do still use data to prove out strategies, but it's an additional on top. The thing that it really does for us is it gets us to more moments. There's just more of them. When you sit in a room and you're trying to empathise with your audience and imagine yourself in those places, you get to some. But here we were just able to find a lot more, and they're also a lot more interesting. The vast number of people in Britain, everyone's got different lives, everyone's got different ways of thinking, and when you're sat in London and it's very difficult to empathise with people that you don't know. And we do our best, but when you actually have data on it and you can look at it and those moments surface themselves, it means that we can have that third part of what Kelly was talking about, the empathy, in a new way. And they're more interesting. Creatives, if you give them a persona or a moment like after work drinks, it's very difficult to spark off that because it's kind of obvious. So here's an example of what we've done where we've got more moments. One of our clients is EE, and gaming's important to them. And what we've ended up doing was starting with the data and running our algorithms on it, and I'll take you through that for anyone that's particularly interested in the data side of it in a minute. But what we ended up with was, rather than having 5 or 6 or 7 moments, we ended up with 19 individual moments that are all quite interesting. My personal favourite is rage quitting. So if you look at the profile of a rage quitting moment, it's when someone's on an extended gaming session, and if you look at their anger curve during that time period, it just goes up and up and up and up and up until suddenly it stops, and they stop gaming, they're done. And so that moment of rage quitting, if you're a creative sat there, that's something that you can really lean into and get into. It's an emotional moment. I would never have thought of that. I don't think many of our strategists would have thought of that as a moment to go after. Some of the other ones, those last scroll before bed, those sorts of things, playing a little game to help yourself wind down, those sorts of things probably would have come up. But that one I thought was quite nice. To take you through what we end up giving to our strategists, this is an example of it. So the truth is we start with the data and we start with a moment, and we start, in this case, with a moment of gaming. And what we do is we cluster moments together. We don't care what time of day that rage quitting happens. I don't care whether you rage quit at 8 o'clock in the morning or whether you rage quit at 10 p.m. You've rage quitted. And so what we do is we cluster those moments in the same way that you would cluster people into a persona or a segment of behaviour. We're clustering moments together and saying these are moments that are similar, and they're similar in terms of the activity they're doing, the people that they're with, the emotions that are being experienced, what they did in the hour beforehand and the hour afterwards, kind of similar. And then we do that completely independently of any other variables about who these people are. We're just caring about the activity, the behaviour, what they're doing. And then what we do is we bring that data back in and we profile that data, we profile that moment, and we can look at who is experiencing it. So this is an example of what we would give. The Friends House FIFA tournament. And what's also beautiful about the data is you also know how many people are experiencing that moment in the space of a week. So that's an example of the output that we give. There's a bit of a process of getting to that. And actually using the respondent level data has been quite a big challenge for us. I have to give loads of credit to Jack Buck in the room, who's a data scientist who's done most of this work. So thank you very much for giving me something to talk about today and for helping our clients. But as I said, what we do is we start with the moment that's interesting. Now, we've got clients of Subway, Richmond sausages, Waitrose. It felt quite obvious for us to do something around eating. And quite often we would limit our audience and limit the data to the audiences we were targeting. But in this case, we thought, let's do total population. So this is an example of what we've done for eating moments. And I've recorded a demo of our dashboard, and I'll see if I can talk to it. I felt it would be easier, but we'll give it a go. What we end up with is we talk about an eating a meal moment. So this is the output after Jack's run all of his wonderful algorithms. This is the output displayed in Tableau. And we have an eating a meal moment. And the eating a meal moment is in the center. This is our moment here. And we've taken data from the hour beforehand and the hour afterwards. And we've taken a whole bunch of variables that we think are relevant to that eating a meal moment. So how happy they were, who they're with, what they're doing before and afterwards. And we cluster that together. And we end up with some clusters coming out. So we've got the clusters in the top right. And I'm just going to... Then we bring a whole bunch of data back in to profile them. And we end up with this Tableau. And then it lies to one of us to go through and spend time with the data, which I'd encourage any data person to do, is really spend time in your data. And we end up with this. And I'm just going to show you 2 example moments that have come out that are slightly different from each other. So this one, if I press the demo, eating a meal. 100% of the people talking about eating a meal. And I'm selecting cluster 5. And I'm looking at the moment. We can go to the moment, the hour before or the hour after, and look at what's going on. But this moment of eating a meal has come out, is happening. It's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Actually, a little bit more breakfast in terms of what it's over-indexing on, but it's profiled quite evenly across the day. What's going on? What are they doing? Well, if we go down, bit of negative emotion going on there. A little bit over-indexing on sad, angry, frustrated, tired, kind of first thing in the morning. And you go down, look at all the different variables that we've got going on, and what else is over-indexing that's actually got some percentage behind it. What's defining this moment? What's clustering it and pulling it away from the others? 96% are with their partner or spouse. It's an eating a meal moment with your partner or spouse. That's one of the big things that's caused that data to gather together into a cluster, a moment that's happened there. Another moment, cluster 4, also a partner-spouse moment, 98%. Bit more evening, it's more of an evening. Some people are doing it at breakfast. Lots of media going on. But if we go up, it's an at-home moment as well. And if we go all the way to the top, this is me channeling my earlier self, 63% happy. Quite a different emotional moment. That's what's pulled these 2 things apart. The happiness, the factor, the way that they're feeling. Why is that? Is it interesting that 48% before were preparing food? Is the preparing food bit together interesting? Or is it that actually 14% are drinking alcohol? Perhaps that's part of it. What is it that's driving that? So it enables us to really dig into what makes the difference here. And when you've got clients like Waitrose, and you've got clients like Subway, perhaps one of them's going to take a cooking moment, perhaps one of them's going to take perhaps I'm a bit more grumpy and don't want to bother talking to you, I'm going to get a takeaway moment. So the same data, naturally, coming up, we then label these, we describe these, we look at what they're doing, and we present them back to strategists. This is really important for us, because a lot of data has... that's used to find the most impactful times to contact people isn't necessarily the same as to find the times that you find the inspirational moments. If you think about a normal distribution of kind of data, there's the times that you want to contact people is where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck in the middle. But the stuff that a creative can sometimes spark off is sometimes that stuff that's really... quite often you'd actually remove as an anomaly from your data. So what this enabled us to do is to really find those anomalous, what might have been considered anomalous things, but actually rage quitting or your drinking alcohol with your partner moment versus a breakfast moment. And those things enable our creators to then go off and do stuff against it. I'm not sure how many data people are in the room, but in case there are, I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're doing. If you want to, you can sit here and read the process, and people can get that afterwards. But what we're really doing is finding those moments, and we're grouping them together based on how similar they are. Now, it's quite a difficult thing to do in terms of clustering, because you it's quite hard to cluster time series data, and the real big breakthrough for us was to go, it really doesn't matter what time those things happen. It doesn't. So we can actually use a data method called hierarchical density-based clustering, Jack, that enables us to do that. So we had to do a lot of flattening of the data, a lot of transforming the data. But the important thing for it was that we had to remove the things that were noise from it. We had to take the noise out and try to find the things that were really relevant, pull them apart, and then group the things back together again to find these distinctive moments. I'm sure if anyone has any questions at the end, Jack would be very happy to answer them for you. But yeah, so there's the main thing for us really is that it ended up with us finding these interesting moments that we can have. Now, if I were to come back and talk to you next year, I'd like to think that we're going to have a whole stream of work written against this. But we didn't have the IPA TouchPoints respondent level data until this year, so it's a fairly new tool that we're using. The cultural change is great because people are really leaning into it and they're writing work off it, and it works not just for planners but also for creatives. Thank you very much.
So, big thank you to Ruth for letting us see that and all that clever stuff she's done with the respondent level data, particularly as a creative agency, so thank you. And how you built that into your own tools as well. And we are seeing the respondent level data used more and more now, and it really does allow you to look at the data in some quite unique ways, like seeing how respondents flow across different media throughout the day, for example. But I wanted to start with something that TouchPoints is less well known for, and don't worry, I'll do all the media charts later. But all of you, through our Daylight tool, will have access to these open-ended questions, which are asked of all the respondents. And this year we asked about the costs of living crisis and what you intend to do more or less as a result of it. And it's 2023, so like Kelly, I felt obliged to give ChatGPT the obligatory appearance to answer that question. And this is what it came back with. And to be fair, it's a great place to start and give you a general overview. There is quite a long disclaimer at the beginning of that answer saying it's not a real person, it's an AI text clustering program. But if you compare that with a real answer that we got back from someone who works for the NHS, and I just wanted to leave that on screen for a second. You know, it's very easy to get caught up into the tools and the media planning side of it and the reach and frequency and forget about the people and the stories behind the numbers. But a survey like TouchPoints is designed from the outset, of course, to collect representative data from real people with real lives, and it shows that a lot of them are struggling. Now, this answer isn't typical of everyone, of course. This lady works for the NHS. Her utility bills have more than doubled in a month, so she can't afford to have the heating on. She's gone interest only on the mortgage. She's had to cut back on subscriptions, and she'll have to sell her house if she wants to retire. It's a sample of one, of course, but there's a lot of answers like that, and the level of worry evident here is reflected in many of them. So that we didn't have to go through all the responses manually, we used an AI text clustering program to identify the different vectors and create segments. And the biggest group was firstly those just expressing general concern and worry about affordability. How are we going to get through all this and make ends meet? Comments like this. There are a proportion of people, of course, who said nothing's been affected, I've always been frugal, we'll save for a rainy day. And if you look at agreement with a statement like I can cope on my current income, you can see how it's gone down in the last few releases, but maybe not as much as you might have thought. And of course, that's still suggesting that out of the whole population, 38% of people can't cope, a figure that goes up to 60% when you look at the lowest income and disadvantaged groups. And it means that people are having to eat into their long-term savings, if they have savings to live, and change their long-term plans. And just since the last wave, which was only 6 months ago, we've seen the number of people who plan to consolidate their debt or remortgage go up most out of this question that we've got on plans in the next 12 months. And the biggest fall in that period was taking out a new mortgage, which I guess isn't that surprising with mortgage interest rates having doubled since Liz Truss, I think, and about to go up again tomorrow probably. And these are quite small percentages, but the direction of travel is clear, with fewer younger people going to university, fewer able to move out of their parents' home, and in those kind of midlife years now, people less prepared to move jobs, to change careers, or to start a new business. So take a bit of a risk in uncertain financial times. And at the other end of the spectrum now, fewer people are planning to retire or to live and work abroad, which is obviously much harder since Brexit now. So all those kind of things have implications, don't they, on how we live our lives and how we spend our time. So people talked about making savings in every area of their life, and the second biggest segment was about using less energy by cutting down on heating and electricity. And respondents sometimes wrote at great length about what they were planning to do to save on energy. So it's amazing what they'll tell you, but things like turn the thermostat down, keep an eye on the smart meter, extra layers, shorter showers, turning the lights off, batch cooking, air fryers, having more sex to stay warm was a real answer that some people thought was a good thing. But despite that kind of green-tinged image on the previous chart, it wasn't driven by environmental concerns at all. The level of agreement with all the environmental statements was down quite a bit. It was driven by the need to save money in hard times. And not to forget that for some people, it wasn't just a case of economising a bit here and there. It meant living in a freezing cold house, even though that's hard to relate to on a day like today, with the increased stress and anxiety that causes. So shopping less and issues around food inflation was the third biggest segment, with lots of crossover between the topics, of course. And inflation, I think it was flat today, new figures, but it might be threatening to come down slowly. But it's still 20% a year on year for food essentials, in particular when we did the field work. A tub of Lurpak, I think, costs £5 in my local Sainsbury's. It's not going down, is it? It's just going up less slowly. And a lot of people said, and a lot of people just said they couldn't afford the basics because there's nothing left to cut. So no surprise that we've seen some big shifts in the data in how we shop and where we shop, and a lot of people just saying they had to eat less and go without. And in the Diary of the Self-Completion Questionnaire, we've seen some declines in reach for all shopping locations, except for very local shops, and actually statements around localism as well, since lockdown and since the Wave 2 last year as well. And people are also shopping differently. So trading down both in terms of branded goods and going to value stores to save money. And we've seen the biggest increases in share, of course, for Aldi, Lidl and Iceland. We've seen more people say they shop around, they root out bargains, they use more vouchers and coupons, and I actively look for money off vouchers showed the highest increase there to 42%. But people's budget more carefully, they use a range of discount supermarkets in their repertoire, they compare prices, and 61% of people say they look for the lowest possible prices when they go shopping, and again, that's a figure that's never been as high on TouchPoints. So in the qual, people talked about all sorts of things on this topic, but I'm just trying to triangulate that against the more modest increases in the questionnaire here. In terms of working patterns and getting back into the office now, the first point to make that, as the government figures also suggest, we do seem to have lost a chunk of older workers since lockdown, whether that's a result of long COVID or just re-evaluating their lives for potential early retirement. And despite the crowded trains, commuting patterns aren't quite back up to where they were pre-lockdown. So this is 2020 pre-lockdown, showing people travelling in with those big peaks at 9 o'clock and 5 o'clock on a Monday to Friday. And then in lockdown, there was that huge drop-off as everybody stayed at home. And it has come back gradually in subsequent releases. But with the latest data there in green, it's still quite a long way off, really, from where it was pre-lockdown when we look at it like this, which has all sorts of implications, of course, on other activities. And there's some evidence that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, like we do here at the IPA, are the most popular choice of days. And Thursday night is officially the new Friday night, with data showing that socialising or drinking with alcohol with colleagues is swapped around there to a Thursday compared to a Friday. But for most, staying in is the new going out, but that's only by necessity. We're trying to avoid anything that costs, really, spending longer in the house than ever before, except for those 2 lockdown releases where it was more like 22 hours a day, which is quite scary when you think about it. And that shows up in the data as well when you look at something like travelling to go out socially or to visit friends and family, for example. The number of people going to a pub, a cafe, restaurant, fast food place, all down. And you can really see how it's the perfect storm for the hospitality industry, having to charge £7 a pint, not being able to get staff at a time when people have got less money in their pocket and are travelling to big cities less. Now, some people are obviously replacing that with socialising in their home and trading meals out for takeaways and delivery, but actually for the first time we have seen a decline in fast food delivery and lower figures for Deliveroo and Just Eat than we did in the 2021 lockdown, which was the kind of high point for all of that stuff. So that lady, that respondent at the beginning, she talked about having to cut back on paying for subscriptions, and we've already seen Netflix reported as losing UK subscriber numbers. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens as their crackdown on password sharing maybe starts to have an impact. And in TouchPoints, we've seen a slight decline in overall reach for SVOD and more significant drops in time. So this is looking at mean hours per day here. And really that was just because the pandemic was a really good time for the SVODs. In particular, there was that big uptake in pay TV subscriptions as people had to stay at home. And I've put share of SVOD service on those bars as well. So you can see how Netflix has been squeezed there since lockdown, particularly with Disney Plus and Paramount and more competition in the market, of course. And if we put those SVOD hours on this chart, so SVOD is the same data, is the bit in grey, live and recorded TV is the bit in blue there, and BVOD is the bit in orange. You can see how all forms of viewing got that kind of bump over lockdown, and all forms of viewing have come down since then. The amount of time overall is basically the same as it was in 2015, but obviously with that downward trajectory of live and recorded TV there. And if we now add other online video to that chart, so that includes YouTube and TikTok in there, and you can see how the video sharing sites have continued to grow, and actually they've grown the viewing pie overall, albeit most of that is a phone and not on a big TV screen. But as anyone with teenagers in the house will testify, young people often seem like the complete opposite of that picture. So I'm just going to turn that into share for this latest release for all adults, and then look at it by 10-year age bands from 15 to 24 to 75 plus on the right. And you can really see how dramatically different those proportions are. So 15 to 24 spending about half their video day on video sharing sites like YouTube and TikTok, mainly on the phone, and just 15% on linear TV. And at the other end of the spectrum, for those over 75 plus, 93% of viewing is linear TV in our data. So I've just reduced the size of those bars now to show actual time. And that is basically our scarcity problem in a chart in reaching younger audiences with TV and video, the reason why they're so much more expensive to reach and why video planning is such a fine art these days. But it's not all about video. Let's put video into the context of other media here. And we've got two ways of doing this now on TouchPoints. So one is all media, including the BBC, SVOD and BVOD, all grouped together into television there, which dominates at 4 hours a day. And we show that because I know we've got BBC and Ofcom in the room and clients who use the data in a non-commercial capacity. I guess it's also back to Josh's point about looking at the data from the consumer's point of view and not how we structure our ad buys. And I'm just going to switch that to the same wave last year. And in truth, there isn't that much to see there really, which will, hopefully mean that we're in for a bit more of a stable period. TV is settling back down from its lockdown boost, and out of home is also now back up to where it was pre-lockdown. The second way, of course, is how Simon does it in the Making Sense report, which is what we call the commercial media landscape. So that's where we strip out the non-ad funded channels and break it down into buyable media types. So you can see on the horizontal axis here that live and recorded TV is much lower, sitting just behind out of home in a commercial environment there, with BVOD split out. And if I just, social's not far behind as well, and if I just extend the axis there so you can see it on one chart, I'm just going to compare that in a second to 1634, so keep an eye out for the changes on that one. So what's happened really is that it's social that's pushed up the most, and that sits alongside out of home in a commercial environment at the top right of the chart. Online video is the other one, the other kind of big grower on that chart. That's with functional internet in the middle. And it's a bit less obvious, but commercial streamed music and podcasts are the other things that are kind of much more prominent in that bottom left-hand quadrant of the chart. But we mustn't be fixated about 16 to 34s. They're certainly not the ones with most of the wealth. So I'm just going to look at older age groups now. So this is get ready for a switch to 55 plus. Now, 55 plus, it's obviously it's a big, diverse group, so I'm a bit loath to group it all together. It's 39% of the adult universe. But commercial TV is nearly off the chart there. And what's interesting about this group is that non-digital media, so this is our definition of curated media types, which do not require an internet connection. This still accounts for 71% of all commercial media time for this age group, mainly because of TV. And it's quite interesting, with this cohort we saw a bump in digital acceleration after lockdown as people had to go online to do Zoom calls or online shopping maybe for the first time. But we've since seen that kind of come back to its more established trajectory. And the idea that sometimes gets talked up about one or the other media dying just really isn't true, but particularly amongst this age group, and where you see an increase in a format like magazines in print, you tend to see a corresponding increase in the digital version of that media. And I just thought it might be interesting to look at that digital, non-digital split with the definition there on the screen. So on an all-adult basis, it's 52% digital now, and that kind of really accelerated over the halfway point during the lockdowns, but split now down again by those 10-year age groups. And you can see just how correlated that is with age. 86% of time with digitally delivered media there on the left among 15 to 24s compared to just 20 among 75 plus. And of course that's driven by device and how device usage differs by audience, whether that's internet connected TV sets, the amount of time that we spend in front of our computers at work, voice-activated devices, but mainly and especially for young people, it's the amount of time they spend on their phone and on social media on their phone in particular. Mobile still takes a smaller share of time than TV across the whole population, although it's still growing. And in fact, I think amongst all of these, it was voice-activated devices, so Alexas and mobiles that grew the most, and radio set that declined the most in terms of share, but with Listen Again radio and podcasts more than making up for it, and actually commercial radio doing very well. So as with all of TouchPoints, we're only looking at opportunity to see and time with media here. Attention or effectiveness of ad formats like a TV commercial versus a social feed are all part of the equation, of course, but these are the building blocks. And when you look at those 10-year age bands, again, you can really see how mobile dominates for 15 to 24s here. They spend, 4.5 hours a day on their phone consuming media, an hour and 45 minutes on a computer, which is slightly obscured by that graphic there, for an hour and a half on a TV set, which is obviously why BVOD across consoles and different devices is so important. Then you see that time on a phone coming down dramatically as we get older, even amongst groups where mobile penetration is high, but they're just spending less time on social media. And time on a TV set rose there to nearly 6 hours a day, with those two lines crossing over X Factor style at about 44, although these are done on 10-year age bands, remember. So the correlation with device, with digital media and with age is as strong as ever. Computer's quite an interesting one on there, staying relatively high until it kind of falls away around retirement age, and time with print or on a radio set grows the older you get. But I've used a true mean on here to be consistent in terms of the average, a true mean, which looks across non-users as well as users. So that might be why time per user looks smaller than you might intuitively think. But I just thought it made the point really clearly where TV dominates, where mobile dominates, and why you really need to think device first in terms of content and messaging. So to summarise, firstly, that cost of living point. Please do dig into that qual data on daylight. So we're actually working on being able to create a segment on daylight and then look at the qual responses among that segment, but we couldn't quite deliver that in time for today, I'm afraid. But the main point is just that the broad picture is everyone's struggling, they've got to cut back on discretionary spend. We saw that SVOD hours have stopped growing for the first time, whether that's a result of the squeeze on incomes or just the maturity of the market. We saw how travel patterns are still not quite back to where they were, but on the whole, media consumption has reverted back to its pre-lockdown trajectory. And the divide between young and old in terms of device is the single thing that's really driving the digital, non-digital split. So it's more important than ever to understand the nuance of how and when different audiences interact with different devices in order to effectively reach diverse mass audiences. Before I go, I just wanted to highlight that nearly all of these views of the data are available on Daylight now, and we've made some more available, like this commercial, non-commercial split here. This is digital versus non-digital, the same as the data we were talking about before. And we've also added more questions to the profiling section, like these questions on sexual orientation, the category catalysts on the right, and we've added the ocean personality statements as well. And remember that if you subscribe, you can email us to ask us to build a bespoke audience for you on Daylight. So hopefully most of you are aware now that we've been developing a new device-agnostic diary app with Ipsos and Purple Planet. That's being tested by friends and family now, about to be tested by our champions group, and it'll be ready for respondent testing and focus groups this summer, hopefully with deployment in September, and that'll make an appearance in the January release of the data. So that's very exciting. We haven't even talked about the channel planner, which is coming out in September. And Telmar have actually built a new version of Media Planner Plus for us, which should make using that much quicker and easier for Telmar subscribers. They're going to be rolling that out shortly. So all the data is out today on all bureaus and on Daylight, and we hope you find it useful. Thank you.
Well, that was a romp through, wasn't it? Does anybody have any questions? Simon.
Hi, Simon. I don't know if you saw Charlie Makin's article in the Media yesterday. Oh, sorry. Simon from PAMCO. Sounding like one of the smash Martians. I don't know if anybody on the panel saw Charlie Makin's article in the Media Leader yesterday, but his headlines were, we're in a post-reach and frequency world, so we don't really need that for planning, and it's time to consign demographics to history, the standard demographics. Do you agree with that?
Shall I take that? Yeah. I think I think I'm still plugged in. I didn't see the article, so I can't comment in detail on his. I can agree with. I can stand up. I can agree with what he means by demographics, because I think you can see like it's so much richer when you can get into audiences behaviourally rather than just. But now I've seen that age breakdowns. There's some really kind of correlatory impacts around media, which we know, but we must steer clear of just being lazy with demographics. I kind of get that point. I don't know what his basis for saying that reach and frequency was dead, because they're the foundational building blocks of how you build media campaigns and reach people. I don't know. If you don't reach anyone, then I don't know how anything works. I'm like, my brain, I'd love to, now I'm going to get back to the office and read to try and understand his justification. What's your view? Oh, so you've taken a mic away. I was going to have a debate about it. What was your thinking?
Well, like you, I think they're basic building blocks.
Yeah.
You layer lots of things that's been demonstrated this morning on top of that, but I think you've got to start somewhere,
Yeah.
and that's as good a place to start as any.
And it's not everything, but it is the big, understanding reach for us, on top of, as we saw with Lidl, like what the business impacts are, when we're really clear on that, and then the quality you can sort of then start to bring in attention, carbon, diversity. Like there are bits of the plan, but essentially reach and frequency is the start point for everything. Yeah.
I think what you suggested is
he wanted a headline, didn't he?
Yeah, I think audience is so diverse now and so fragmented.
Yes.
That those measures, I don't agree with that.
No, and it's our job to understand that complex landscape and kind of make the best, simplify that for our clients, make the best decisions with, rigorous testing and understanding of how the brand operates in different channels. That's how I would see it. But I'm a planner.
If I can just add to that, that's why with fragmentation you need things like the channel planner, which allow you to bring it all together.
This isn't really a question, and actually just adding to this discussion, which is we're grappling with something at the agency, and I'm sure other people are as well. So demographics can be quite lazy audience definitions. ABC1 as well, the majority of the population. But actually, if you've seen in this data about cost of living crisis, the level of disposable income probably is pretty important for certain categories. So if you then go, well, actually, I want people with a certain degree of disposable income to go and purchase my premium price product, and I want to go and target them in whatever channel. There are some channels where traditionally we can go, well, the Barb says that AB's view, whatever it is, so if I buy a spot in that TV programme, then I'm delivering them. But if you go to some of the walled gardens where some of the targeting abilities are, income, household ownership, class, profession may not be so readily available, it becomes very, very hard to translate a defined audience into activation. And that's something that it's almost like only become more acutely aware of as I'm talking to my, for instance, digital director about, well, hang on, why are we doing this when we wanted that? And I'm just wondering whether anyone in the room has got any sort of clues towards how you cope with that. Vicky, perhaps.
It is a challenge. We acknowledged it a couple of years ago when we came back out of COVID and realised it was partly a structural agency challenge because our planning team wasn't as connected to our biddable team as it should be, and essentially we changed that. So we put those two teams together because only by bringing the plan together can you understand the nuance of what a broad kind of top of funnel bit of the plan can look like in combination with how it sits through the funnel with those targeting lines that are quite specific and very different. And I don't have the exact answer for your challenge, but it's by getting the right people in the room to solve those problems together, and they're two very different disciplines, and we brought that team together to help overcome that exact challenge. And we called it connected performance because we also, everything should perform. Like whether it's just different KPIs, it could be a reach KPI, an ROI KPI, a cost per acquisition. There's lots of different KPIs, but they should all perform. Media should perform, however you're spending it in what channel. So that was our attempt to solve that problem.
So I guess that's the first part is identifying you have a problem, and it's how do you go and solve it?
Yeah.
From our virtual people for Ruth. The first one is, once you made the decision to ingest the RLD, how long did it take before you could start generating insights?
I'm going to be really honest now and say that I was off on maternity leave. So we started to talk to Dan probably about a year and a half ago about getting the respondent level data. The ability to test and play and things like that, it took quite a long time to come up with the right method, as far as I understand it. We tried out lots of different types of clustering, tried lots of different ways of trying to get to it. As computing power increases, we can get to things in terms of running things and trying things. You get to things much quicker. Now that we've got it, we can turn it around in 2 days. something like that, to go from like getting the new set of data into being really clear on what the right variables are. The caveat to that is it really depends on what kind of behavior you're looking at. So if you've got something that's as clear in the data as meal, it's quite easy to find that data point and look at it because it's just there by itself. If it's something a little bit more unique, then you've got to do a bit of playing with the kind of data that you're bringing in, making sure it's robust enough, there's enough of it, there's enough sample in it to be able to do it. So it really does kind of depend on what you're looking at. And if we find some really obscure examples, we'll probably ask for it to be added in as a question. Don't sit down, okay.
Is it fundamentally k-means clustering of respondent data as an approach?
Okay, I'm going to have a go, and then if I'm wrong, let me know. It's not k-means clustering. Oh, is this? It's not k-means clustering. It's a bit like a single linkage model. So if you think about the way that you're building your clusters, we find it's like single linkage, so you end up with kind of dendrogram above it. But what hierarchical density-based clustering does is to actually help you understand how many different segments you should bring in and flatten it right down. So it is kind of like k-means clustering in that you're looking at the distance between points and you're looking at the distance between measurement and you're bringing that together. But it doesn't start with kind of iterating cluster centers. It starts with a single linkage. It's more like a single linkage model. Okay, good.
And last, our virtual friends, any advice for anybody thinking of using the RLD?
Yeah, try it. The best piece, I was saying to someone earlier, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got in terms of my data career was from my first manager, Ian Scully, and he said the most important thing you can do as a data person is to spend time with the raw data. And I think a lot of the time we look at aggregated metrics and we look at data on Facebook and we see, these aggregated things, and with AI, the algorithms that sit behind things are becoming more and more obfuscated, and a lot of the time we say, oh, it works, it's good enough, but actually getting the raw respondent level data, sitting with it, understanding what's in it, certainly gave me, when we're doing any work with TouchPoints data, and we tend to use through Telmar, gave me a much better understanding of what's actually going in, how complete are people actually filling things in. So try it would be my view, and you'll find we've got a bunch of ideas of where we're going to take it around, clustering people on top of the moments, how many people experience same moments together. There's places we want to take it, but for us, if you're having a look at it, spend time with it, you'll come up with ideas if you're a data scientist or a data enthusiast, like I would classify myself. Can I sit down now?
Do we have any more? Yes.
Hi, it's Mark from Jigmail, and a question for Vicky ultimately. But firstly, I just want to say congratulations to the team, because, from someone who's been here from the beginning of those early launches, the richness of the data set is there to be utilised. So it's really great to see how that's evolved. And I remember that we originally launched on the kind of thought that rewarding time is the new kind of value metric, the new planning metric. And from what we've seen this morning, that seems even more relevant than ever. And I was really interested to see kind of Vicky's sort of use of really using TouchPoints to bridge and understand the more complex multi-channel relationships to guide those more holistic kind of decisions. And that seems to me to be a really important area going forward, and actually really kind of digging into and leaning into unlocking the value of those relationships across the channels strategically. Feels like a really important kind of area to dig into going forward. What do you think?
First tool we train for people to, when they join as planners, it's absolutely fundamental, so I completely agree. And 16 releases, and every time you learn more, and I literally don't know what we'd have done without it in lockdown, because that just helped. You know, supermarkets were the Ipsos. We knew that they were the superheroes in lockdown, and lots of people here I'm sure worked on supermarket brands like we did, and to help them make those decisions in those moments and be really close to that is absolutely invaluable. We talked about reach and frequency, and that's how it's really complex. We get so much data. It is about cutting through. It's understanding what data that matters and the things that bring together in a holistic plan, so that then we can take that to a client and be really clear. And I always say, be really clear about the data, what you do know as well as what you don't know, and be really clear about, right, this data set and this is how I've done it, and be super transparent about how you've got to that answer, and we always try and do that. But TouchPoints takes us such a long way to understand how all the channels work together. So yes is the answer. Yes, we do. We love it. Yes.
Cheers. Alex OMD, so Vicky will know me well. So with the sort of de-appreciation of the cookie and sort of other ways of tracking in a more sort of privacy-focused future, do we think there's more value in going after moments and context than an individual themselves?
I think if you mean by targeting them with media, that you know more about it than I do. If it's more about being able to build empathy with someone and being able to understand really clearly what that use case is and how someone might be interacting with your product, certainly in terms of the content that gets put into whatever you're targeting someone with, I think having the ability to really get to that connection with the customer is something that, as people that are producing the content, we need to do. In terms of actually going after them, in terms of finding them, I'm not going to say that I know the answer to that one. I would like to think, and this is probably a creative agency perspective coming out, that if you can have a really powerful message that really, in whichever forum, whichever format you're putting out, really tries to connect emotionally with the customer and resonates with not necessarily their lives exactly, but something they can relate to, wherever you put it, it's going to work better. I think one of the challenges is that there's been a lot of data in the media world, and we haven't embraced it as much in the creative side as we need to. And I think that what it is forcing us to do is to say that where the media can't carry that for us, we need to be as engaged with understanding people as our colleagues in media.
Questions. We're drawing towards 11:30, and I did promise we'd close at 11:30. So if there are no more questions from anybody, first of all, I have to thank everybody that's spoken this morning. Kelly took us from deep despair at the beginning and finished on a note of optimism. So I hope we can take some of that optimism with us this morning. Go and look for the optimism. It's there if you look. Vicky gave a masterclass in planning and how you approach planning and the way in which they are solving challenges and answering questions for their clients. And Ruth has just done an absolutely brilliant job in showing us how you can take the TouchPoints respondent level data that step further, use the RLD data, go and look for answers to those questions you didn't think you could find the answer to. We all have data as we talk about data abundance, but we don't use it enough. It's probably like my use of Excel. I use about 10% of its capability, and I should be using more like 50 or 60%. The same is true of the data sets we have at our disposal. And lastly, thanks to Dan for romping through the latest data on his reminder. Most of what he talked about today you can access via Daylight, so please do go away and look at it in Daylight. It's all there for you. It's available, I think, now, from midday now. by the time you get back to the office. And lastly, I'd like to thank you all for making the effort to come. And for those of you virtually online, thank you for joining us online. And if you've got any comments or feedback, we'd be very happy to hear from you. And thank you for coming, and have a good day.